Gary, Indiana, in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. This union made it possible for millions of Americans, whether they were a member of a union or not, they need to realize that. You made it possible for
Good morning, everybody. You are streaming live now from Fox on this Thursday, August 11th. My name is Regina Gonzalez with you live from our Orlando, Florida studios. I'll be with you for about the next hour and a half, getting you all up to speed on the major top stories that we are following here, both in the U.S. and internationally as well. So we'll do just that right now. We do have a live event coming into our desk. Secretary of State Antony Blinken continuing his tour of Africa. We will get to that in just a moment. But you know what? We actually did just get it into our desk. Really quickly, though, as far as the top stories go, we are going to be monitoring several. The funeral for Indiana Republican U.S. Representative Jackie Walorski will be held today in her home state of Indiana, where she and 3 other people were killed in a head-on highway crash. We are expected to get those feeds coming in again at around 11 a.m. Eastern time. And then we're also going to have some more news related to the economy coming out at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time. The Producer Price Index report, which is a measure of the change in prices paid to producers of goods and services, will be released and will give more indications on inflation following that Consumer Price Index report yesterday. And some good news to really anybody who has a car that's not electric. The national average for gas officially falling below $4 a gallon for the first time since March. So that's some of what we're looking at here. Obviously, we have many top stories to bring you here throughout the morning. But as we always do, we prioritize the live, the raw, and the unfiltered. And Secretary of State Antony Blinken is speaking right now from Rwanda in Africa, continuing his multi-location tour out there. So we're going to listen in live, raw, and unfiltered.
Any particular group, any particular race, religion, ethnicity, we came together around an idea, a shared idea, that all are created equal and that all are entitled to the same basic inalienable rights. And of course, we have never made fully good on that ideal. We're in constant search of it, constant efforts to form our own more perfect union, which is an acknowledgement that we're not perfect, and this is a constant ongoing effort. But we do it openly, we do it transparently, we deal with our challenges, as I think the world can see. And so, by way of explanation as well, why we care so deeply about what we believe to be universal rights, not simply those that pertain to Americans. And again, on the matter in the case of Paul Rusesabagina, what I can share with you today is that I raised this with President Kagame. We had a discussion about it. I'm not going to again, characterize that. We'll continue to engage, and I'll also follow up with the family.
Yes, when Rwanda deals with people who commit crimes against our country and our people, we abide by laws, both national and international. We know some other countries have their own methods to deal with those kind of people, those criminals who commit crimes against their own countries. But as far as Rwanda is concerned, we do it in respect of our laws and in respect of international laws. Any other people could qualify these as international repression or whatever, but when we deal with people who commit crimes against our country, against our people, we abide by the laws, both national and international. That's what I can state to you.
Thank you very much. My name is Edwin Musoni from the New Times. I'll ask the Minister and the Secretary of State. Minister, the alleged linked UN group of experts report indicated that the DRC army was supplying arms to FDLR. And it also indicated that the FDLR commander under that arrangement ordered the shelling of Rwandan territory in May. Now, this happens at a time when Rwanda is under pressure that it is allegedly supporting M23. What is your take on that, and how can Rwandans be assured of their security? Mr. Secretary, now, given the fact that FDLR gets support from the Congolese army, how does the U.S. expect Rwanda to protect its borders against any attacks that happened, like the one happened in May? And also, at the same time, you cannot talk about FDLR without talking about the genocide. They are responsible for the genocide. Today, the United States remains the only country in the world that has deliberately refused to adopt the official definition of the genocide, the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi. Now, what's the logic behind this deliberate stubbornness of the U.S. not adopting the genocide? Yet, as you said, you stand by Rwanda. Thank you.
Rwanda is not the cause of long-standing instability in eastern DRC, where we have over 130 armed groups, including the M23. And the presence of the FDLR and the close collaboration with the army of the DRC has always been the most significant cause of insecurity. And this enables the FDLR to conduct terrorist operations on Rwandan territory, something government of Rwanda cannot accept. And Rwanda, we always reserve the right to take necessary measures to protect its integrity, its territorial integrity, its sovereignty, and to ensure the security of its people. This being said, Rwanda remains committed to the processes mandated by the African Union and other regional organizations, which we hope the United States will continue to support for all of us to bring lasting peace to Eastern DRC and to the entire region. Thank you.
There are very credible reports of support for armed groups by all sides, including the FDLR, by Congolese forces, and M23 by Rwandans. And our position is clear. Whoever it's by, whoever it's to, that support needs to cease for any armed group. When it comes to the FDLR, it has sought to conduct attacks on Rwanda, and it's supported hateful ideologies. And we've seen supports, as I said, we've seen reports of cooperation between Congolese forces and the FDLR. I raised this directly with the president in in the Congo, and we are pressing again for that support to cease, just as we're pressing for any support to M23 to cease. These groups need to end the violence, demobilize, and pursue talks with the government. And as I noted, both leaders here in Rwanda and in the Congo made clear to me that they're prepared to engage in talks with the various armed factions as necessary in order to pursue their demobilization in the context of the process led by President Kenyatta and others, the Nairobi process. We'll continue to support that. And when it comes to recognition of the genocide and the horrors committed, we've been very clear about that. I'll have an opportunity to visit the memorial in just a few hours, and to continuously take account of the almost unfathomable suffering of so many people that remains present in people's lives, and will continue to work at the United Nations for every appropriate recognition of history, even as we do everything possible every single day to make sure that that history is never repeated. Thank you.
Final question from
Hi. Following up on that same issue, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned your conversations with both the President of Rwanda and of the Democratic Republic of Congo. And in Congo, you heard many complaints about the violence in eastern Congo and the support of Rwanda supposedly for some of the armed groups to the extent that they demanded sanctions be imposed against Rwanda. And yet here you probably heard a certain amount of popular support for the M23 group. So how do you reconcile those two very disparate positions in your quest for negotiations as you described? Did you specifically ask President Kagame to end the support for M23? And then finally, do you now put the M23 and the FDLR on the same ground? It seems like you're almost making an equivalency between the two. So I'm interested about that. And then, Mr. Minister, the U.S. government is asking you to end support for M23. How do you respond to that? Thanks.
Thank you. So it's a matter of principle that applies equally. This is not a question of weighing one group against another. There's a basic principle that there should not be support coming from governments or coming from their entities like their armed forces for arming groups like non-state groups like M23 or like FDLR. And that's a basic principle because to the extent that that happens, that's likely to perpetuate conflict and violence, not end it. Doesn't suggest one way or another equivalence between groups or some valuation, but the basic principle is very important, and it's very important here. And yes, I specifically raised that with President Kagame, just as I raised it with President Tshisekedi in the DRC. We also raised another principle, which is the territorial integrity of states and the need to protect that. And we also raised another principle, which is that leaders have a responsibility to speak out against hate speech, something that we've seen, unfortunately, increasingly in recent months with regard to the Congo in particular, directed at certain communities, including Rwandaphones, and directed at the UN and its mission there. So this is something that I raised in both meetings with both leaders. And the question, of course, is now turning principle into practice. And that's what we talked about. And the best way to do that, in our judgment, is to pursue the African-led mediation efforts through the Nairobi process. President Kenyatta has now been designated by the East African community to carry on that mission, even when he is no longer in office as president of Kenya. President Lorenzo from Angola is also very engaged. And what we heard from both presidents is their appreciation for our own efforts, the United States efforts, to support that African-led mediation effort. We'll continue to do that, just as we've been doing in the months leading up to this visit.
Whatever government of Rwanda could do in DRC or in our region will be about protecting our people and protecting the territorial integrity of our country and its sovereignty. It is not about supporting M23. And if we want a lasting solution for the problems in Eastern DRC in our region, we just need to deal with the root causes of the problem, which is the presence and the preservation of the FDLR in Eastern DRC and their collaboration with FRDC. Let me remind you that they have, together, jointly, they have shared the Rwandan territory 3 times, on 19th March, on 23rd May, and on 10th June. And we have always warned the government of DRC, we have asked them to stop those attacks. And if we need really a lasting solution, we should go to the root causes of the problems, which is the genocide ideology being spread in our region from the genocide which took place here in 1994, and the preservation of the FDLR, which is a genocidal force. And there are mechanisms in place. There are regional mechanisms which were agreed on by the African Union, by the East African Community, by the ICJR, and we just need to go to those mechanisms, be serious with them, and implement them. And we find solutions to the existing political issues in the DRC, and eventually we achieve peace for all of us. Eastern DRC needs peace, but we also need peace for us to develop our countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you, Minister. Thank you very much, everybody. That's all the time we have for questions.
All right, everybody, that feed definitely cut out very quickly, but that was Secretary of State Antony Blinken speaking live alongside the Foreign Minister of Rwanda. He is continuing his multi-stop tour in Africa. So usually at this time in the morning in the United States, we'll get some international feeds coming in. He's been in Africa for several days now, and you saw him addressing a multitude of topics, so we wanted to bring that to you here on Live Now from Fox. Some of you are going to see a quick 2-minute commercial break. When you return, we'll get you all up to speed on the top stories both here and internationally that we're continuing to follow on this Thursday morning. Good morning, everybody. You are streaming live now from Fox on this Thursday, August 11th. Thanks so much for starting off your morning with us. My name is Regina Gonzalez. I'll be with you for about the next hour, getting you all up to speed on the top stories that you want to know about as you start off your morning. So let's take a look at that sidebar that we constantly bring you each and every day to show you what we're keeping a close eye on. So a very tragic story that we brought to you last week, and today the funeral for Indiana Republican Representative Jackie Walorski is going to be held in her home state of Indiana, where she and 3 other people were killed in a head-on highway crash. This funeral is scheduled to start at 11 a.m. Eastern time at a church in Indiana, so we are expecting to get those feeds into our desk. Walorski was 58 years old and was in an SUV with 2 other members of her staff back on August 3rd when it crossed the median of a northern Indiana highway for unknown reasons and collided with an oncoming vehicle near the town of Wakarusa. So when we get those feeds into our desk, we'll certainly bring them to you here on Live Now from Fox. We're also going to get new data related to our economy today. The Producer Price Index, which is a measure of the change in prices paid to producers of goods and services, that's going to be released at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time and are really going to give some more indications on inflation. This is already following that Consumer Price Index report that we got yesterday that showed inflation cooled a little bit. So the Federal Reserve obviously keeping a close eye on all of this data to see what their next move will be when it comes to interest rates. So we'll have some more in-depth reporting on what we can expect today and then what we saw yesterday with that CPI report. And then some good news for people who fill up their tanks with gas. We do know that the national average for gas fell below $4 a gallon for the first time in March, according to AAA. So definitely some better news when it comes to the status of our economy and traveling on the road. We're also continuing to follow the latest when it comes to former President Donald Trump. Not only did we have that Mar-a-Lago raid on his estate, well, that was the raid on his estate Monday evening. But we also have Republicans promising to ramp up oversight of the Biden administration following that raid. And then we are also bringing you the latest on his court appearance in New York yesterday for a deposition in a separate investigation by New York Attorney General Letitia James, really talking about his real estate and business practices. He pleaded the Fifth and decided not to talk. He did release a statement on that. So that is where I want to start first. Here's the latest from David Lee Miller in New York City.
Former President Donald Trump left Trump Tower this morning, waving to the cameras and with a fist pump, as he headed to the office of the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, to plead the Fifth rather than answer questions under oath. James deposed Trump in a civil investigation into allegations he fraudulently inflated the value of certain assets to obtain loans, tax deductions, and receive other financial benefits. In a statement, Mr. Trump wrote in part, "I did nothing wrong, which is why after 5 years of looking, the federal, state, and local governments, together with the fake news media, have found nothing." The statement continues, "I decline to answer questions under the rights and privileges afforded to every citizen under the United States Constitution." In 2016, then-candidate Trump had another take on the right against self-incrimination. He questioned why aides to Hillary Clinton pleaded the Fifth during an investigation into a private email server.
You see, the mob takes the Fifth. If you're innocent, why are you taking the Fifth Amendment?
In his statement today, Trump recalled his earlier remarks, writing, quote, "Now I know the answer to that question. When your family, your company, and all the people in your orbit have become the targets of an unfounded, politically motivated witch hunt, you have no choice." Shortly before his deposition got underway, Trump went on the attack, releasing an edited video of Attorney General Letitia James.
This illegitimate president. We need to focus on Donald Trump. We need to follow his money.
He also posted a social media message saying, quote, "As people are getting murdered all over New York, and she spends her time and effort trying to get Trump." This afternoon, a spokesman for the Attorney General confirmed Mr. Trump invoked the Fifth Amendment. He was at the office for about 6 hours. Although he refused to answer questions, that didn't necessarily stop them from asking. In New York, David Lee Miller, Fox News.
All right, thank you to David Lee Miller for that report. Meanwhile, continuing to follow the reaction that has poured in regarding the FBI raid on his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida. The former president having quite some reaction, certainly also with his family. So as we continue to follow that reaction, we're also getting supporters on the Republican aisle promising to ramp up oversight of the Biden administration following this raid. He appeared in New York, as you saw yesterday as well, for a deposition in a separate investigation. So here's Jonathan Seri with reaction to both of these situations.
Former President Donald Trump invoking the Fifth Amendment in New York as part of a civil investigation into his business practices. On Wednesday, he sat for a deposition but refused to answer questions under oath. He defended his actions in a statement saying, in part, quote, "When your family, your company, and all the people in your orbit have become the targets of an unfounded, politically motivated witch hunt supported by lawyers, prosecutors, and the fake news media, you have no choice." The New York probe is one of several Trump is facing. On Monday, FBI agents searched his Mar-a-Lago home. According to a New York Post report, they spent several hours looking through Trump's private office as well as Melania Trump's wardrobe. The search warrant reportedly focused on presidential records and evidence of classified information that was potentially stored on the property.
They've obviously collected a great deal of material, and that is itself concerning.
The Department of Justice now facing mounting pressure to comment on the raid. Republicans are vowing to increase oversight of the Biden administration and the DOJ, calling the FBI search politically motivated.
Everyone in this country should be concerned when the Department of Justice has been weaponized against American citizens.
Democrats say that's not the case.
The person that was appointed to the FBI was a Donald Trump appointee. Many of the judges that are looking at it are Donald Trump appointees.
Trump's team says it cooperated all summer with the DOJ to produce any missing National Archive documents. In Palm Beach, Florida, Jonathan Seri, Fox News.
All right, thank you to Jonathan Seri for that report. With these two instances, certainly a busy week when it comes to the former president's legal matters. So what I want to do right now is bring you a segment from our very own Mike Page. He spoke with an attorney about the questions that are surrounding this Mar-a-Lago raid, about the investigation from the New York Attorney General. It's a little more than 15 minutes long and provides some good insight into what's been going on with Donald Trump over the last couple of days. So here it is on Live Now from Fox.
Doug Burns, former federal prosecutor, joining us here on Live Now from Fox. And Doug, I first want to ask you, just with the former president here, and we are obviously waiting a DOJ update, FBI update. From your expertise, will we hear a statement from them soon, or we won't hear it until maybe charges are brought?
You're probably not going to hear it. And, you know, they're using the normal sort of cover, as it were. First, you have to remember, I mean, everybody's got to understand that, you know, the day-to-day cases that we're all involved in, you know, week in, week out, are much different than a really highly charged political case. So, you know, a lot of the experts, Mike, and pundits have been saying, well, wait a minute, weren't the defense lawyers given a copy of the affidavit in support of the search warrant, you know, because it's sealed in court, which I sort of understand. But, you know, and then they're saying, well, if the lawyers have it, why wouldn't they, on the Trump side, release the affidavit? Because for the viewers, I mean, the bottom line is we really need to see that affidavit. We need to see exactly why they were contending that they needed to go in to do a search warrant, you know, exactly what they were looking for, the exact offense that they claim was involved. And then you've heard the other experts say that, you know, why didn't they simply issue a subpoena? But again, I don't want to get out in front of the ski tips in the sense that I need to see the affidavit, go through it carefully, and then I can make some decisions. But to your very good question, which everybody's asking, is why doesn't Merrick Garland, why doesn't the director of the FBI, why don't they come out, you know, to a podium and say, we did this search, this is what we were looking for, this is the section of law that we contend was violated. So we're all scratching our heads as to why that hasn't been done, to answer your question.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, you know, when we heard of the breaking news earlier in the week, it was a big moment because we never heard the term FBI raiding a former president's home, and that's exactly what we heard and saw, and it all played out there, and it was unprecedented. But as a former federal prosecutor, can you maybe just talk about what the steps needed to be before that raid took place to get to them to go into Mar-a-Lago? I think a lot of people would be interested in knowing the steps to get us to that very moment.
That's a great question, Mike, and the reason it's such a good question is because you can take the law books, and the statutes and all of that and the procedures, and then you just go with just plain common sense. So many of my colleagues and I were kicking around, almost joking around, as dumb as that sounds, saying, well, wait a minute, can you imagine going to the U.S. attorney and saying, we want to search, the prior president's home, we want to get a search warrant? I mean, we would be put through the ringer in that meeting. Along the lines of, well, wait a minute, Doug, have you subpoenaed the information? What's the extent of the conversations you've had, particularly with someone as high profile as a former president of the United States? So it would go all the way up many, many, many chains to answer your question in the local U.S. Attorney's Office, which in this case was the District of Columbia. But then it also would go to the highest echelons of what we call Main Justice, the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C., the Deputy Attorney General, the Attorney General of the United States. Every single one of them was definitely in the loop. And to go a little bit into the politics quickly, you heard Leader McCarthy say, well, wait a minute, if the Republicans take over the House in the fall, we are going to convene oversight hearings, and we're going to get to the bottom of exactly the question that you, Mike, just posed.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are thinking that way and just want to know because, I mean, this is a former president we're talking about, not, Joe Schmo down the street there where the, the DOJ and the FBI had an issue with. But another one that I'm hearing these reports as well as that when the raid was happening, Trump's attorneys were there and they were not allowed to see maybe what was happening. Is that protocol, if those reports are right?
Yeah, well, that's an open question on factually whether we are being told the truth. Because to answer your question, generally speaking, a copy of the warrant is shown to counsel for the individual whose premises are being searched. If the lawyers are present, sometimes they're not, by the way. They don't necessarily have to afford them the ability to hold on to a copy of it, which gets into the earlier discussion we had about, why hasn't it been released by the defense side. But assuming for the sake of this discussion, Mike, that they showed them the warrant and then took it back, essentially, they would generally, the general protocol is to allow the attorneys to be present. So I'm not really signing on 100% to this notion that no lawyer was allowed to be present. I'm going to await judgment on that fact, not legal point, but on that simple fact as to whether or not the attorney was allowed to be there. But again, this is so highly unusual because, I mean, it's a records violation, Presidential Records Act. It involves the National Archives. The National Archives were in discussions with the former president's team about these documents. So it really is, as you said, it's completely unprecedented.
Oh, yeah, and obviously it has just rocked the political world, and that is much discussion as well. But to get away from really the political side of it, but I just want to ask you this question. What would it have been like if Donald Trump was at Mar-a-Lago during the time? I mean, what do you think would have happened in that realm of the way when the FBI came in and he's on the property as well?
Well, it's another really good question because here's the thing. First of all, a former president of the United States, obvious point, is being guarded and protected by the Secret Service. So the FBI had to have notified the Secret Service that they were going to be coming to execute a search warrant. It's so bizarre, even the words coming out of my mouth, a search warrant of a former president of the United States. Because again, Mike, normally, you would want to articulate to a court why you couldn't get this information through other channels. I mean, in hardcore, narcotics, organized crime type cases, very often you may have an informant telling you they're getting ready to destroy the very records that'll provide, incriminating evidence for the prosecutors. So then you go and you get a search warrant. You tell the judge, we have reason to believe the stuff's going to be removed or destroyed. Professor Alan Dershowitz made a great point, which is that in a normal white-collar case, somebody might destroy records. Here, destroying the records themselves is a very serious federal crime if they're documents, subject to the purview and overview of the National Archives. So again, all I'm saying, and I'm not defending anybody, I'm not condemning anybody, you brought me in just for legal expertise. The point is, it seems to me that it would be very unlikely for them to have shown that they couldn't have obtained this material in another fashion. And so the silence, back to your first question, of Merrick Garland, the director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, the silence really is kind of deafening, because one would expect, and other experts, I mean, this isn't just from me, Professor Turley and others are saying, well, wait a minute, if you had a good, solid, sound explanation for why you did this, you would come out, one would think, and make that explanation. But we're not hearing that. But back to your question, had the president been there, that really would have been a very, very interesting dynamic, obviously. If he was there with lawyers and counsel, they would have reined him in and said, Mr. President, we just looked at the warrant. It appears to be valid on its face. It appears that the U.S. magistrate judge, I believe it was Reinhardt, signed it. So we're going to have to simply sit back and let them, obtain that which is called for in the warrant. But again, I need to see that document so I can see exactly what they were saying was where. You go right back to high school social studies. The Constitution says that the place has to be described with particularity, what's to be searched, where it's located, all of that. And that's what we need to see. And we need to see it yesterday, as the old cliche goes.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And now, normally, that would be a very, very busy week in the world of news, but it just continues to get even more busier in the world of the former president, because today we find him in New York on different matters. This is with the New York AG on matters about the Trump business practices, and today he goes there and pleads the Fifth. I just want to get your reaction to that, as well as, first off, we hear it in the movies so much, TV shows. They love to have that famous line, I plead the Fifth. But what, for the viewers that are watching, what does that mean when they are being questioned and under oath?
Yeah, you have to differentiate out quickly a criminal case and a civil case. So, I'll give you that quick explanation. In a criminal case, everybody has the right, absolute right, to remain silent, not incriminate themselves. That cross-references with Miranda, of course, the warnings, you have the right to remain silent. But more importantly, Mike, in a criminal case, a jury is told by the judge, ladies and gentlemen, you can draw no negative inference whatsoever from the fact that the defendant asserted his or her Fifth Amendment rights. They have an absolute right to remain silent, so you can draw no inference. This case is a civil case, however, and that's what makes it very, very interesting and very, very different. This is a civil investigation into whether or not Trump, his organization, executives overstated the value, as you guys teed it up earlier, of properties in order to obtain financing, in order to obtain tax breaks, et cetera. So now he's asked to sit for a civil deposition, essentially, in a civil case, as I just described it. And he decides to assert the Fifth Amendment. The first quick editorial, obviously, which we heard ad nauseum all day long, but this is true with all politicians, is that their words from years ago come back to haunt them big time very often. So Donald Trump, was a little bit glib one time. He was talking about, I believe it was some organized crime figures. And he said, if you're innocent, why would you take the Fifth? And it was a little glib. And he paid a price for it today because they kind of quoted that back in his face and tried to jam it down his throat. He gave a good explanation, though. He said, I used to think that was true. Now I know different because this is such a witch hunt, and right into the standard approach. But in a civil case, if you take the Fifth Amendment, and let's say I'm the defendant, hypothetically, putative defendant, Mr. Burns, did you overvalue the property at, 110 Smith Street? And I take the Fifth Amendment, In a civil case, a jury can actually draw what we call an adverse inference against the person. And that explains, incidentally, a very interesting practical thing that happened today. He was in there for something like 6 hours. In a criminal case, that's unheard of, Mike, because what happens is you go in, the person takes the Fifth Amendment, and the prosecutor or the lawyer for the government says to the lawyer, Mr. Lawyer, is your client going to assert this privilege on every question we ask him today? Yes, he is, Mr. Prosecutor, and they wrap it up and go home. The reason why this went for 6 hours today is that they painstakingly, the Attorney General's office painstakingly went through question after question after question to make them take the Fifth Amendment so that they could set up later down the road the adverse inference being drawn against them. So from 30,000 feet, now that I've explained all the legal X's and O's, I mean, look, for the President of the United States to take the Fifth Amendment is a pretty dramatic development, obviously. But those who automatically pontificate in media that, aha, that shows he's guilty, that's very naive, that's very misleading, that's very disingenuous, because the Fifth Amendment can be tricky and complicated. He had the right to assert the Fifth, by the way, this is interesting, on the notion that they might have been trying to trap him into some kind of perjury trap like was done to General Flynn, for example. So that's separate and apart from the ultimate business about overinflating assets. So it can be tricky, it can be complicated, but I'm just telling your viewers, Mike, that you shouldn't just say automatically, aha, he's guilty, and you shouldn't on the other side say, aha, it doesn't mean anything. It's significant, it's a significant development. I think that Trump really had to kind of, bite his pride, whatever the term is, to do it today. I think it was smart that he followed the lawyer's advice because of this perjury trap point and other points. But at the same time, politically, you still have the reverberation of the former president of the United States asserted the Fifth Amendment. We all know, again, I don't know why I keep coming back to high school social studies, but hear me out, that asserting the Fifth means that the answer would tend to incriminate you. So let's be fair here. I mean, there's a lot to drink in about it, actually.
Well, yeah, there's so much at stake. And my final question to you, Doug, is you're always great here. Former federal prosecutor joining us here on Live Now, just in case people are just joining us here talking about Donald Trump's legal matters right now. But I want to talk about, I mean, there's no kidding aside. It seems like at every avenue, Donald Trump is looking to run again for 2024. And it seems like he would like to make that possibility quicker than later. But I just want to ask you, Doug, as these investigations continue to really go towards him, would it be better for him to announce before the midterms to say, I want to run because not say because of these investigations, but maybe try to put pressure on the investigators? Or as a former federal prosecutor, what do you say about that as far as, okay, if we do have another presidential candidate, do we have to treat these investigations differently?
Well, it's interesting because you've probably heard, Mike, and the viewers as well, that there are DOJ policies and material in what we call the Department of Justice manual, that talk about not interfering with an election. I found it particularly interesting that the DOJ manual talks about, 60 or 90 days before an election, you don't take any action. They did the raid 91 days before it. That wasn't lost on me. So I saw some political experts saying that it might be bad if he announces now, and that's sort of a little bit above my pay grade, et cetera, as it's more of a political question. But to your question, it's very interesting because on the search warrant, this was fascinating. They were talking about the fact that, it involved confidential records. And if you look at the statute, and for the armchair Googlers, 18 USC 2071, which you heard other experts cite, that statute has a clause in there that says if you're convicted of it, you can be disqualified from holding office or seeking additional office. One of my friends today, a longtime, assistant U.S. attorney, said, yeah, they probably put that in there. It makes sense for a situation where a former official, any official, compromises government information and documents, so you want to bar him. There's then a fascinating question that I'm not going to get all into about, can that statute really change the qualifications to run for president, because that's really in the Constitution. But put that to the side. The bottom line is on your question, Mike. It's really hard to say, but I think the conventional wisdom is that he should wait till after the midterm elections. And I don't think it necessarily affects these investigations all that much, because the 2024 election, the one that he would be involved with, would still be 2 years out.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, Doug Burns, former federal prosecutor, breaking it all down for us and giving us a wealth of insight on this very, very big topic, a busy week for Donald Trump. And it's only Wednesday, Doug. I don't know. Maybe later in the week we'll have you on again. Who knows what else is going to happen?
That would be great, Mike. I appreciate you having me tonight.
Hey, no problem.
All right, some great legal advice there. You have attorney Doug Burns, I should say a friend of the Live Now from Fox program, with our very own Live Now from Fox's Mike Page, speaking on all the legalities surrounding the raid in Mar-a-Lago. Trump pleading the Fifth in New York yesterday after the investigation into his business practices from the Attorney General. So we'll continue to follow these stories for you here on Live Now from Fox. Also, another development when it comes to the former president. We've actually been taking you out to New York City a lot during the raid at Mar-a-Lago, and then he was in New York yesterday. Trump has been in New York. He wasn't in Palm Beach when the FBI did enter his estate on Monday evening. But yesterday we got new developments from the Department of Justice after they announced that they're charging an Iranian national accused of plotting to murder former Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton. Investigators are revealing details about their investigation. So here's the latest from Fox's Lauren Blanchard.
A member of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard has been indicted for offering hundreds of thousands of dollars for the murder of John Bolton, the former national security advisor under President Trump.
The FBI will dedicate every available resource to identifying and disrupting these acts of terrorism.
The Justice Department, in newly unsealed documents, says nearly a year ago, Shahram Poursafi offered $300,000 to a contact in the U.S. to eliminate Bolton, providing the person who turned out to be an FBI informant with addresses at Bolton's travel plans. It's believed the hit was in retaliation for the January 2020 strike that killed IRGC commander Qassem Soleimani. The DOJ says they believe Poursafi was trying to organize the murder from Tehran.
This is an especially appalling example of the government of Iran perpetrating egregious acts of transnational violence.
The murder-for-hire plot revealed as negotiators are in talks to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. The U.S. left the agreement during the Trump administration. Bolton said he would do all he could to stop the U.S. from re-entering the deal, writing, "Iran's rulers are liars, terrorists, and enemies of the United States. Their radical anti-American objectives are unchanged. Their commitments are worthless, and their global threat is growing."
Fox has confirmed a second target in the murder-for-hire plot. Poursafi planned to offer $1 million for former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In Washington, Lauren Blanchard, Fox News.
All right, thank you to Lauren Blanchard for that report. We are slowly approaching the top of the 6 o'clock Eastern time hour. Here actually is a live look at the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. As the sun is beginning to rise, I'm going to send some of you on a quick 2-minute commercial break. When we come back at the top of the hour, we will get you caught up on everything we are following this morning here on Live Now from Fox. Good morning, everybody, and welcome in to Live Now from Fox on this Thursday, August 11th. My name is Regina Gonzalez with you live from our Orlando, Florida studios, continuing to get you all caught up on the top stories that we're following here in the U.S. and internationally as well. I'm going to give you a look at some of the major ones that we are keeping a close eye on, and then we will get to some others here within the next couple of hours. It is going to be a very somber day in Indiana, and that is because the funeral for Indiana Republican Representative Jackie Walorski is going to be held today in her home state. That is where she and 3 other people were killed in a head-on highway crash. This funeral is scheduled to start at 11 a.m. Eastern time from a local church. So we are going to monitor feeds coming in, and we'll certainly stream it for you live, raw, and unfiltered. Walorski was 58 years old, and she was in an SUV with 2 other members of her staff back on August 3rd when their car crossed a median on a northern Indiana highway for unknown reasons and collided with an oncoming car near a local neighborhood close to where she lived in her district. So again, we will monitor feeds coming from her funeral services today out of Indiana. We're also getting some news and more data related to the status of our economy today. The Producer Price Index report, which is basically a measure of the change in prices paid to producers of goods and services, that's going to be released at 8:30 a.m. Eastern time and is really going to give more indications on inflation. Yesterday, that CPI report did show inflation cooling a little bit. So we are going to certainly keep a watch on these numbers coming at around 8:30 this morning. And then following some more news related to our economy, good news for drivers today. The national gas average, AAA, confirming that it has fell below $4 per gallon for the first time since March. I remember being on set with you guys back then as we just slowly reported that it was climbing and climbing above even $5. So this is a national average. Depending on where you're joining us from, you may see prices that are still higher than $4, but it's certainly some better news for drivers and for really just all Americans who need to commute to work, who are going on road trips, and yada yada. So as we also continue on with some more top stories, we are going to bring you the latest, and that's what we were doing before the top of the hour. It's been a busy week for former President Donald Trump, his Mar-a-Lago estate being raided by the FBI on Monday night. And then yesterday, he had to testify or answer questions from New York Attorney General Letitia James regarding her investigation into his real estate and business practices. And he did decide to plead the fifth, which means he did not choose to speak. So we are going to have some more in-depth reporting on that. But we are actually going to head to the White House right now to talk about the current president. And that is because Biden is beginning a vacation in South Carolina, leaving behind some improving economic news from that CPI report yesterday and lingering questions about that FBA raid on his predecessor's home. So Fox News correspondent Doug Lazater has more from Washington this morning, where another round of inflation numbers, like I just mentioned, will be due out at around 8:30.
Some good news at the gas pump today. Overnight, AAA reported that the national average just dipped below $4 a gallon. That's still much higher than it was a year ago, but well down from the $5 mark that we had back in June. President Biden, the First Lady, and son Hunter all departed for a vacation in South Carolina, but not before the president celebrated new inflation numbers showing that overall prices led by gas leveled off last month.
That's what happens when you build an economy from the bottom up.
All right, everybody, we did get out of Doug Lazater's report. Looks like we had a bit of a technical glitch when it came to finishing up that story. So we're going to work to get it back for you here, but we're going to continue on with some more news that we are keeping a close eye on. This is actually going to take us out to New York City. That's because the continued spat between Texas Governor Greg Abbott and New York City's Mayor Eric Adams seems to have no end in sight as the Lone Star State buses another group of migrants to the Big Apple. This is is a live look we have over our Fox News headquarters. Our Fox 5 New York team has also been keeping another, really a close eye on this story as well. So here's the latest from Fox News correspondent Brian Yennis.
New York is a sanctuary city. Mayor Adams said that they welcome in illegal immigrants. I kind of feel like Clint Eastwood. Go ahead, Mayor. Make my day.
Texas Governor Greg Abbott is firing back after New York's mayor blasted him for sending more migrants to the Big Apple without providing any information on when the buses were coming or how many people were on board. On Wednesday, 3 buses carrying nearly 100 migrants rolled into New York City's Port Authority.
There are children amongst them. There are families. They need to be treated humanely. That's all we're asking for. Don't treat them as political pawns.
Abbott began sending migrants as a way to bring awareness to the illegal immigration crisis he says many border states are facing. He says the buses are only a small taste of what Texas has been dealing with for years.
Texas is being overrun. Thousands and thousands and thousands. New York City gets 100 people, and now it's a problem.
So far, Texas has sent more than 5,000 asylum seekers to New York and Washington, D.C. The recent influx has the mayors of both cities asking for federal assistance. Shelters in New York are taking in as many people as they can, but officials say they're being stretched thin. In the meantime, average folks are stepping up to help.
We're going to help them out economically, financially. We're going to give them a way to start out, at least for buying Pampers, for buying wipers, or buying formula for the babies.
Texas Governor Abbott says he will continue to bus migrants who've crossed illegally into the U.S. to New York City, Washington, D.C., and maybe even other communities. In New York City, Brian Yennis, Fox News.
All right, thank you to Brian Yennis for that report. Meanwhile, heading back out to Washington, D.C. For some news that we brought you live, raw, and unfiltered just yesterday morning. President Biden signing the Pact Act into law. This bill basically extends health and disability benefits to veterans who deal with health issues resulting from toxic burn pit exposure during their military service. The Pact Act actually does hit the Biden family very closely. President Biden's son, Beau Biden, died of brain cancer in 2015. Beau was a major in the Army National Guard, and he deployed for Iraq back in 2009. So we do have this full press conference for you that will play a little bit later in our show. But in the meantime, I'm going to send some of you on another quick 2-minute commercial break. When you return, we are going to get into some more stories making headlines across our country. This is some very chilling video coming from Evansville, Indiana. Yesterday afternoon, as many as 39 homes damaged and 3 people killed after an explosion in this Evansville neighborhood. We're also going to bring you the latest details on some news that we are expecting today. Arguments for having a new trial for Scott Peterson on whether a California juror who helped send him to prison in 2004 amid worldwide publicity was biased because she was a domestic violence victim. And then we're also going to have the latest on some more stories from California. A very tragic one that we followed closely yesterday afternoon. A suspected gunman in custody after authorities say he shot a cop in the face and then led SWAT on an hours-long standoff in Arcadia. And then yesterday, jury selection did begin in Vanessa Bryant's lawsuit against the Los Angeles County. She's alleging members of the Sheriff's Department took photos at the scene of the deadly helicopter crash that killed Kobe and their daughter Gianna. So all these stories coming up after this quick break. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox, everybody. Some more news making headlines across our country on this Thursday morning. At least 3 people are dead and multiple homes destroyed in an explosion in Evansville, Indiana. This is some of the aerial footage that we got from the scene after it happened yesterday afternoon. As many as 39 homes may have been damaged. It could be more. There is no word right now on what caused this explosion, but multiple agencies are investigating. So if we do get any more information, we'll certainly keep you updated here on Live Now from Fox. Meanwhile, we do want to continue on with some news coming out of the West Coast today. The argument for having a new trial when it comes to Scott Peterson on whether a California juror who helped send him to prison in 2004 amid worldwide publicity was biased because she was a domestic violence victim. That is happening today. Rochelle Neese failed to disclose during jury selection that she sought a restraining order while pregnant in the year 2000, saying she really fears for her unborn child because of threats from her boyfriend's ex-girlfriend. She also failed to disclose that her boyfriend beat her in 2001 when she was pregnant with another child. Lacey Peterson, the late wife of Scott Peterson, she was 27 years old when she was killed while she was 8 months pregnant with a son whom the Petersons planned to name Connor. Investigators said that on Christmas Eve of 2002, Scott Peterson dumped his wife's body from his fishing boat into the San Francisco Bay. This was a very publicized trial more than a decade ago at this point, 2 decades ago, I should say. Peterson was eventually arrested for that case after Amber Frey, a massage therapist living in Fresno, told police that they had began dating a month before Lacey Peterson's death. She said he had told her his wife was dead, and Peterson has maintained his innocence throughout this entire more than 2 decades. So a death sentence was already thrown out by the California Supreme Court. We are going to work to get in touch with our KTVU Fox 2 team out of San Francisco, and hopefully we will be getting some feeds and more information later this afternoon on this case. Meanwhile, a really heartbreaking story out of California as well. And this was breaking news that we followed very closely yesterday afternoon. A suspected gunman in custody after authorities say he shot a cop in the face and then led SWAT on an hours-long standoff in Arcadia. A source initially told our Fox 11 Los Angeles team of a possible shooting investigation in this area yesterday afternoon. The police department later confirmed a location of the incident, adding that it stemmed from a fight between 2 brothers. One of the brothers was said to be armed with a gun, and when the Arcadia police arrived, this armed man started shooting at the officers, hitting one of them in the face. A woman family member from the house was also shot during the series of gunfire, and a second person was also hit. The second person was actually not the family member of the suspect and was likely hit by a shrapnel. So this triple shooting prompted a SWAT response. A standoff extended just past 10:30 p.m. local time. So basically a couple of hours. And our Fox 11 Los Angeles team has been following this story. So we will certainly bring you more details here as we learn them on Live Now from Fox. The conditions of the officer and the 2 people have not been specified as of late last night, and officials have not released the police officer's identity, and it is unknown what prompted the fight between the 2 brothers in this Arcadia home. So again, we'll work to get you more information here as the morning progresses. Also staying in California for a big story that we followed years ago. Jury selection beginning in Vanessa Bryant's lawsuit against the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. She alleges that deputies took photos at the scene of the deadly helicopter crash that killed Kobe Bryant and their daughter Gianna, then shared those pictures. Bryant says she suffered emotional distress when responders shared these graphic pictures of the scene, and an attorney for LA County says the pictures were never released publicly. Also joining the lawsuit is Chris Chester, who lost his wife and daughter in that crash. Meanwhile, heading to New Mexico for another big story. The man accused in the shooting deaths of 4 Muslim men in Albuquerque, New Mexico, is denying any involvement in the crimes. 51-year-old Mumad Syed made his first court appearance yesterday. He was arrested Tuesday afternoon in a traffic stop near Albuquerque and told police that he was so unnerved by the violence that he was driving to Houston to look for a new home. After searching his car, police say they found additional evidence that further tied him to the murders. So this is some virtual video that we got from his court appearance yesterday. This was a big one that we were following for the last several days, certainly rocking this community in New Mexico. Meanwhile, in other news, as the school year is beginning, with the mass shootings that we have seen over the last couple of months, it's prompted parents and local law enforcement to be concerned, and they're trying to be as prepared as possible when it comes to doing active shooter drills. So this next story is going to take us to Utah, where police are doing just that. Here's the latest from Fox's John Franchi.
Learned here today at Cypress High School is one that the first responders involved hope they never have to use in real life, but it's the lesson they also realize is just too important to ignore.
Shots fired, second floor on the west side of the school.
With rifles drawn.
He just started working his way down the hallway.
And without delay.
Last seen near the main office.
Law enforcement ran through the doors of Cypress High School.
One suspect down.
They didn't know where the simulated threat or the actor posing as the gunman was located.
There's another suspect in the building somewhere.
And that's the point of this drill.
One suspect down, room 501.
Practicing tactics if the school is ever attacked.
Apprehend the suspect, stop the killing, and then start the process of rescuing the students outside the building.
Utah has been immune to the country's epidemic of mass shootings at schools.
Statistics are very clear that an incident like this is roughly a 1 in 10 million chance. We are preparing and training for that 1 in 10 million chance.
But that chance is reason enough to make sure everyone is prepared, just in case.
We never want this to happen, but we have to have that understanding and prepare for when and if that does happen.
Unified Police led the drill. I asked for the example of the Uvalde, Texas school shooting, in which police said the gunman was in the building for more than an hour before being confronted, demonstrates why these drills are necessary.
Texas just highlights the need for it. But we've been doing it.
Trying to get a hold of medical group, we made contact.
Way before that ever happened, and we'll continue to do it into the future.
In these incidents, every split second matters.
We want to make sure that we're up to date on tactics.
Every lesson on being prepared can save lives.
We want the bad guys out there to know that if you attempt to come onto a school campus, that we're going to be ready for you, that you're going to be apprehended and you will be killed.
You may be wondering why our cameras were not inside the Cypress High School building. Well, UPD says they don't want any potential bad guys to see this and gain an advantage by possibly learning any police tactics. In Magna, Sean Franke, Fox 13 News, Utah.
All right, everybody, you are going to see another quick 2-minute commercial break. When you return, we are going to head overseas and bring you the latest on the war in Ukraine as the U.S. pledges more aid while fighting intensifies. And then we're also hearing from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her delegation who traveled to Asia, that very controversial trip to Taiwan that has now sparked military drills to continue around Taiwan from China. Her delegation held a press conference all about their trip, so we'll have that full presser here when you come back as well. Stay with us. Welcome back to Live Now from Fox, everybody. As promised, we are getting you caught up on the latest international headlines that we're following on this Thursday morning. As fighting continues to intensify in Ukraine, the United States is pledging more military aid, actually its largest package yet, to help Ukrainian forces fight off the Russians. So we've had Fox News international correspondent Alex Hogan with us from Kyiv for the last several weeks. So here's her latest report.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin making a visit to a key NATO ally. Austin landing in Latvia to meet with U.S. troops stationed there. He's also holding high-level talks aimed at expanding the American military presence as the fighting in Ukraine rages on. That could include more troops as the Pentagon works to ensure the war doesn't spill over into neighboring countries.
We will enhance our rotational deployments in the region and intensify our training with our Baltic allies to further strengthen our combat-credible posture.
The visit comes just a day after President Biden authorized another military aid package for Ukraine, the biggest so far. More than $1 billion worth of weapons and ammunition will soon be heading here, bringing the total U.S. commitment to just under $10 billion.
We will continue to ensure that Ukraine can push back against Russia's unprovoked aggression, and that's going to be our focus.
That announcement coinciding with an uptick in fighting in the south. Earlier this week, there was a huge explosion at a Russian airbase in Crimea. Ukraine's president won't confirm or deny reports that his forces were responsible.
The presence of Russian occupiers in Crimea is a threat for all of Europe. The Black Sea region cannot be a safe place while Crimea is occupied.
The fighting is also intensifying outside of Europe's largest nuclear power plant. The White House says there has been no sign of increased or abnormal radiation levels. In Kyiv, Ukraine, Alex Hogan, Fox News.
All right, thank you to Alex Hogan for that report. Meanwhile, for the last several weeks, we've been following the reaction to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and her delegation's controversial stop in Taiwan while they were on their tour of Asia about almost 2 weeks ago at this point. Her and her delegation praised Taiwan for embracing democracy. This was one of the talking points about her trip to the East Asian country at a press conference yesterday. The delegation of 5 House Democrats joined Pelosi for the 2-day trip to Taiwan last week as part of their Indo-Pacific tour. China has said Pelosi's visit violated the One China policy, which is Beijing's claim to be the sole government of both mainland China and Taiwan. The congressional delegation also made stops in Singapore, Malaysia, South Korea, and Japan. So we here on Live Now from Fox pride ourselves on airing these major press conferences raw and in their entirety. So we do have that for you here on Live Now from Fox. Let's listen in.
Good afternoon, everyone. Some of us have just come from the White House, where the president really signed a monumental bill, honor our Pact Act for our veterans. It was legislation spearheaded in the House by Mr. Takano, chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, and in keeping with our purpose, honor our oath to protect and defend, and again to honor our veterans for their service. As we have said, in the battlefield we leave no soldier behind, and when they come home we leave no veteran behind. Protecting to defend is what our Codels are always all about, defense. That's the purpose, the justification. We expand that to include economic issues as well as governance issues. Security, economy, governance. To that end, we follow the lead of our president, who made clear that one of his priorities was a strong Asian Pacific initiative to increase our cooperation in those fields: security, economy, and governance. It was a remarkable trip in which I'm very proud to have traveled. We're like 6 co-chairs of the delegation because we all brought so much to it. But again, I'm very thrilled, almost emotional about what happened at the White House today. But actually, it's what this week has been about. The CHIPS bill is a national security bill that was signed yesterday. The Pact bill today, again, yesterday afternoon, the president signing the authorization for our support of Sweden and Finland coming into NATO, and then on Friday when we pass the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, again recognizing that strong economy is essential to a strong defense of our country. So again, we went to, as you know, Singapore, Malaysia, Taiwan, South Korea, the Republic of Korea, and to Japan. In all of the countries, we met with the leadership of the country, but important to us and central to it was our interparliamentary meetings to show that we see the role of Congress in strengthening the discussion. We went with humility, we went with respect to listen, to learn what their views were about what the president was proposing, and sharing with candor and respect how we saw things. It was very constructive in that way. We also had the privilege of being, well, here we are in some meetings. They're self-explanatory. That's the Prime Minister of Singapore who welcomed us grandly. But we also paid respects to some of the cultural aspects of their country that they were so proud of in Singapore, in all of the countries. And perhaps we'll go into that. Again, 6 co-chairs, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Gregory Meeks, and you'll hear from him in a moment, Mark Takano, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Susan Delbeni, the vice chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Raja Krishnamurthy, a member of the Intelligence Committee, and Andy Kim, who cannot be with us, child care, was gone last week, child care issues. He has 2 little boys, and he is a former diplomat working in the State Department under President Obama, and a member of the Foreign Affairs as well as the Armed Services Committee. He sort of was our diplomat on the trip, would you say? And we miss him here, but he's available to answer any questions you may have. It is the beautiful diversity of our trip. Imagine this, the beautiful diversity of the trip, which is self-evident. But Mr. Takano, Japanese American, Mr. Krishnamurthy, born in India, Andy Kim's parents born in Korea, so the respect for culture, country, and differing views so eminent for all of us on the committee, but some of it directly connected in that way. The purpose, as I say, was to talk about defense, economy, and governance. And our members will talk about some of that. But in each of the countries, we thank them all for their immediate and strong response to condemn Russia for its invasion of Ukraine. To the president, especially those in South Asia, we thank them for their leadership in just banning Burma, as I call it, from participating in some of their meetings in reaction to their execution of 4 political leaders there and their oppression of political dialogue there. It was remarkable to see, but of course we talked about, in terms of governance, we talked about COVID, we talked about climate change, and the rest. So it was very valuable. In different countries we had specific issues that related to their countries, which we can talk about if you wish. In terms of Taiwan, our purpose in going to Taiwan was to say that we have this strong relationship built on the status quo, which we support, which is really important because they're saying, well, we're trying to upset. No, the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, at the same time as our change of recognition, established the terms of our relationship, the 3 U.S.-China joint communiques, and the 6 assurances. So there's no departure from that. But in keeping with that, we will not allow China to isolate Taiwan. They have kept Taiwan from participating in the World Health Organization, other things where Taiwan can make a very valued contribution And they may keep them from going there, but they're not keeping us from going to Taiwan. We will not allow them to. So we think their reaction, that was our purpose, to salute this thriving democracy. Don't take it from me. Freedom House said one of the freest democracies in the world. Show our respect for that, for the success of their economy, for the enthusiasm of their young people to embrace democracy, and others as well, but the young knowing nothing else except a free Taiwan. So that was our purpose. Their pretext was our visit, for them to do what they normally do, intensified. They didn't do it when the Senate went under Chairman Menendez of the Foreign Relations Committee. They just decided to do it this time. So in any event, we're very proud of our delegation. We're very proud of our men and women in uniform. When I talk about security, whether it was at Travis Air Force Base, whether it was in Hawaii, where we visit with them and went to the Arizona, and then to Guam on our way to get their appraisal of the situation in the region, the Asian Pacific, and also to pay our respects to our men and women in uniform, which we did there, and we did in the countries that we visited, especially in Korea and in Japan. And in Korea, we had the privilege, led by the General Lakamura, to go to the DMZ to get an up-to-date current report of the North-South dynamic in Korea. It was interesting to me because I've been to Pyongyang, I've been to North Korea. It's a horrible place, but again, we were seeing where at the border how things were going. So for these and other reasons, we were very honored to be received. We thanked our host of the host countries. We spent a good deal of time in an interparliamentary way in every country with their speakers and that. And again, we thank our embassies and our diplomats who represent us so well and who made our visit such a success. Just close by saying two things. When we were in Japan, we were beautifully welcomed at the Diet. We went there to pay our respects to Prime Minister Abe, who was a friend of America, and they had their tribute. They'll have more, but this one they invited us to. It was very sad, but again, a connection between our two countries. And in closing, I just want to thank our president. He has been a president for peace, for security, for economic growth, for good governance, and we're very proud of his initiative, which was the main purpose of our visit and our timing. With that, I want to yield to our distinguished chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, excuse me, that's the Senate, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and the place where so much of all of this begins, to praise him for his commitment to our security, our economic success, and good governance in all the countries that we are engaged with. Mr. Chairman. Gregory Meeks of New York.
I want to thank you, Madam Speaker, for the opportunity to participate in this very important, very substantial, and very successful CODEL. It was important for us to be there in the region. The people of the region wanted to see us there. They understand that part of what is taking place in the world is, as we see from place after place, it's a question of democracy versus an autocratic government. And they want to know that we are partners. And that's why they welcomed us at every stop that we went to, saying thank you for being here, whether it was Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, or Malaysia. In Taiwan, we saw people lined up down the streets, over 250,000 people watching our flight land. And then the crowds on the streets saying thank you for coming. We had the opportunity to talk and to have conversation with various of our legislators, which was really important. And we had to then chat it back and forth on what we're doing. And I had the opportunity as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee to let them know that we're doing many things. particularly in regards to Taiwan. We've got some bills that were coming out or that have passed already, like the Taiwan Peace and Stability Act. They were interested to know that, like the Taiwan Fellowship Act and the Taiwan Reassurance Act, and provisions supporting the name change of TACRO to the Taiwan Representative Office in the United States. Again, it is not us who want to change the status quo. We see that coming from Beijing. And they were so appreciative that we stood to show that we're going to partner with our friends and allies throughout the region. They all have issues, whether it's the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait. But they want to know that we are there, and they want to see even our soft power. And that's why the conversations that you see with my fellow members, and they'll talk about whether it's working with our veterans or dealing with climate or dealing with what was historic with reference to chips and exchanges and dealing with manufacturing goods in the United States. I conclude just by saying that, and I thank President Biden also for being in the region. He's visited the region and done another thing. So we're in lockstep with our focus and our message to the people in Southeast Asia, that you have a friend, an ally, and a partner in the United States of America. And when you call to ask us to come to visit you, as we did on this trip, we'll be there with you. So with that, I just turn it over to the chair of the Veterans Affairs Committee, Chairman Mark Takano.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We kind of call each other Mr. Chairman all the time. When we first became chairman, we were just so thrilled in 2018. Yeah. Mr. Chairman. So good afternoon. I am Mark Takano. I chair the Veterans Affairs Committee, and I was honored to attend this congressional delegation, be a part of the congressional delegation with Speaker Pelosi and our colleagues here today. And while we were abroad, there was interest with our defense security allies and partners. Some are allies and some are partners. Interesting enough, we visited all very, very robust, inspiring democracies. Some of those democracies have a quote-unquote balanced approach with China. They don't really want the United States to force them to choose sides. But interesting enough, even those that don't want to be forced to choose sides are very, very, very interested in the United States being their security partner. They want to, we help them with military armaments and training and training together. And of course, they were interested in what we do with our veterans. I had a long, extensive talk with the defense minister of Malaysia on that topic. I had a chance to speak with, for a second time, with the Minister for Veterans and Patriots of South Korea. We're very interested in moving forward more work on the Korean Valor Act, which was included in the recently passed fiscal 23 NDAA. The Valor Act was passed there, and it has to, I don't want to get into the details yet, but it has to do with naturalized Korean American veterans from the Vietnam War era and how we can serve them better here in the States. We had a chance to, wherever we could, bring up the issue of human rights, but also I believe that the health of any, when we visit all democracies, that the health of any democracy is measured by how well it protects its vulnerable minorities, in contrast to the authoritarian countries that Mr. Meeks mentioned. And so we raised the issue of how well are your vulnerable minorities being treated, as well, including LGBTQ people. So we raised that in countries where that topic is not necessarily one that's very comfortable. But interesting enough, I think there was actually a willingness to talk and a willingness to discuss those things. Just last night, as an after effect of this CODEL, I was on a virtual discussion, a virtual interparliamentary discussion with Japanese and Korean parliamentarians from the South Korean Assembly and leaders of the Japanese Diet. amazing. The impact of this trip was very evident. Huge openness to moving
important way for us to save money and put more into those classrooms behind us and those kids that we're trying to teach. And in some cases, even, you can have what's called V2G, which is vehicle to grid. If we have excess electricity, we can put that back into the grid, and depending on where you are, be reimbursed for that sort of thing. So, I mean, this is just a win-win-win all the way around for everyone. And so I want to thank everyone, the federal government, state government, local support, and of course the APS community for their undaunting support in putting together these the funding for these 7 electric buses. And I will tell you as I conclude, that's just the first step. We are also moving forward. We've got in the planning stages, we hope to put in a solar-powered bus canopy over all of our buses over here. As we all know, the damage that can occur from hail, living here in Colorado, that would help us protect the buses that we have. But being fully solar-powered, it would also help us power basically all of this campus that you see around you right now. That's in our future plans, so the buses are the first step. Hopefully the canopy will be the next step, and APS is fully on board with going as green as we possibly can in order to make it better for our kids and for our community. And now I'd like to introduce Sabrina Pacha, who is the Senior Director of the Healthy Air and Water Colorado. Sabrina?
Thanks, Mark. And as Mark said, I'm the Senior Director of Healthy Air and Water Colorado, or HAWC, if you don't want to have that whole mouthful all the time. We're an organization that is dedicated to mitigating the health impacts of climate change. And that's why I'm so grateful to our federal leaders, to the governor, to the folks at the EPA, and to our state legislature for securing the funds for cleaner and healthier buses to protect public health. Every day, our organization works with health professionals across the state who are treating and seeing the very real and urgent health impacts that climate change is causing right now. We work with a pediatrician, Dr. Sheila Menke, who lives down in Thornton, and her clinic is here in Denver, or just down the road. When she's driving into her clinic, I-25 South, if you've taken this road, you know exactly what I'm talking about. You come up over a hill and you see the Denver skyline. On her way in, when she sees that skyline and it's a little hazy, or there's a brown cloud, she knows that that day in her clinic, it's going to be packed with kids struggling to breathe, coughing, with exacerbated asthma and other respiratory illness. And unfortunately, the reality is that in the metro area, every day in the summer, more often than not, there's a hazy skyline or a brown cloud hanging there. So that's what transportation pollution is doing to our kids' health. It is exacerbating any existing respiratory illnesses they have, and it is putting them at higher risk of developing asthma or any new respiratory diseases because of the toxic pollutants that are coming out of diesel-powered buses or gas-powered cars. And we know that this issue is also an issue of health equity. The research and lived experience of many folks and communities across our state tells us that communities of color and low-income communities are exposed to transportation pollution at much higher rates, exacerbating already existing health inequities and putting these folks at higher risk of health consequences from pollution and climate change. So we are so excited to be here to see, this is my first time seeing an electric school bus, because these are representative of the steps we are taking to protect our health from climate change. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to one of our very close partners, Ian Tafoya with Green Latinos, Colorado State Director. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. And I actually have had a chance to see one of these buses before, thanks to Mom's Clean Air Force. And you know, the biggest thing I saw was a difference when I got on there was like, wow, they have seatbelts now. They didn't have those before when I was writing it. But hi, everyone. My name is Ian Thomas Tafoya, and I'm the Colorado State Director for Green Latinos. And I'm going to be doing this speech a little bit in Spanish, a little bit in English, but I want to make it clear in our work here in Aurora that Aurora Public Schools is one of the government agencies that's really leading the way on language justice, whether we're talking about Vietnamese or maybe the other 100 languages that are spoken here in one of the most diverse parts of our city. So for language justice, I'm just going to go back and forth here, especially if there's some media here. But hola a todos, mi nombre es Ian Thomas Tafoya. Yo soy el director de Estado de Colorado para Green Latinos. We're an organization that is fighting for environmental liberation. Green Latinos es una organización que lucha para la liberación ambiental. And during my last year, and really last 2 years, I've traveled all across the state of Colorado. And I've heard from families and the environment that they are facing many environmental challenges for their communities, including air quality. Durante mi último año de gira por el estado, escucha de diferentes familias y los desafíos ambientales que enfrentan en sus comunidades. Este proyecto de ley es un gran ejemplo de los líderes estatales y federales con la comunidad que juntos hacen que el estado sea más saludable. Excuse me. I want to say this again in English, that this bill is a great example of state and federal leaders, along with community, working together to make our lives healthier. Part of the reason why Green Latinos is so excited to see this bill take effect is because our Latino communities are directly impacted by pollution and, of course, climate crisis. In recent polling, more than 78% of Latinos in Colorado say they have personally experienced the effects of climate change. And el transporte es la principal fuente de contaminación de aire en el estado. Transportation is the leading source of air pollution. You just heard from health, it was a group that works with health, about how diesel exhaust is classified as a carcinogen by the EPA. And it has been linked to numerous health problems, including lung cancer, asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia, and directly connects to COVID, which we are still dealing with in our communities. And that's why this bill is so crucial in starting to combat climate crisis. It's a first of many steps to create change for our communities. We have been working directly with both the EPA and CDPHE and the governor's administration to turn the page post-COVID for the health of our communities. Todos tenemos derecho a aire limpio, los niños, los conductores y todos los demás. Es importante que luchar para que nuestros distritos escolares implementen esta nueva tecnología y depende de todos nosotros educar a nuestra comunidad sobre este programa. Hagámoslos juntos. We all have the right to clean air. The children, the drivers, and everyone else. And it's important that we advocate with our school districts to implement this new technology. And it is upon all of us to educate our communities about these programs. Let's do it together. I want to say thank you for being here. Thank you to the EPA. Thank you to the governor's administration, the representatives, the legislators, and most importantly, the community who showed up in droves to testify to make these kind of bills happen and to put the pressure and accountability on our leaders to make these programs happen. I'm going to pass it back to Administrator Casey Becker. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. We have a few minutes for a few questions from the press if you're interested, and I'll just try and direct those in the right way if there are any questions. Yes? What's the price point for each bus? I can answer that unless there's someone else that wants to. A fully EV bus is, well, the EPA is rebating about $375,000 for the EPA program, and that's in the range of the full cost. And with the EPA program, you can also do CNG or propane, and then you get a lesser amount. But so it largely depends on what bus you're getting, and so up to $375,000 for EPA. We're also including money for infrastructure, up to $20,000 for EV infrastructure out of school district. Yes.
How long will it take to transition the entire state fleet to electric? Does this program do that?
I'm with a combination of this program and the state when it rolls out, nearly all new buses that are purchased in the state will likely be electric within a couple of years. But buses are used for a longer period of time. So in terms of when the last diesel bus gets off the road, I think you're probably looking at about 10 to 12 years would be my guess. I think you'll be a majority electric buses much sooner than that, probably in the next 5 or 6 years. So the deadline's August 19th, and all I can say is many have. I don't know if they've all publicly indicated that or not, but many school districts have applied, and a number of others are finishing their paperwork. I think there's a couple that, don't we have a few that have applied early and said they have, I think, so, yeah.
Yeah, I think Gosh, there are, I think, about 188 school districts in Colorado. Not all of them have applied. They still have another 10 days to get them in. But we have, we have requests for at least around 80 buses so far for Colorado. And so we'll see where we end up in the next several days.
Yeah.
Are rural and disproportionately impacted communities on a higher priority list compared to other schools in the state?
For the EPA program, we are prioritizing rural areas, and I believe for the state program, you're prioritizing Class 1 Title I schools. Is that right?
Yeah, we see this, it's both a air quality issue, but also an environmental justice and health issue in communities that are disproportionately impacted. So electric buses are a solution for every kind of school and district across the state. It'll save every school money the sooner they get implemented. And I think that the state funds, which complement areas that have more air quality impacts from health, are going to be available statewide, but will help focus on making that transition where it's needed the most. Yeah, well, what this does is it changes the math for school districts, where it actually costs school districts more, considerably more, to replace a bus with a diesel bus than it does with an electric bus. It costs them more up front to buy a diesel bus, and it costs them more in operating costs. So with the federal program, it essentially pays for the entire cost of the electric bus. What the state program, again, which will be rolled out and fill a lot of that holes, will leverage funds so that electric buses cost less than diesel buses by covering more than that difference, in addition to supporting additional costs like electric charging infrastructure where needed along routes.
Thank you. But I guess what I'm trying to ask is like we have seven buses in APS. We have a whole lot over there that's full of diesel buses. Like how much of the state's fleet can we replace with these?
Yeah, buses are used a long time, so that's you have to ask each district. But as I said, I'm sure APS bought diesel buses 2 years ago and 3 years ago. Those will still be used for a number of years, but all the buses being replaced going forward over the next couple of years are going to be shifting over to electric.
Yeah, and both the state program and the EPA program are taking older school buses off. As the program continues to grow, the cost of school buses will go down. So we don't know exactly how much money it'll take to replace every school bus. We'll see over time as we replace older ones and as the absorption rate increases, just how the cost goes down as well.
Yeah, I think a majority of the fleet, you're talking 5 or 6 years for a majority of the fleet to be electric, and then 10 to 12 years where it's going to be over 90% will be electric. The priority is, I think you indicated pre-09 buses. There were new emission standards for even school buses. The older diesel buses out there are the highest priority to replace because they have the highest emission profile compared to the diesel buses that were purchased 2 or 3 years ago. So this is rolling on fast. There's going to be more and more electric school buses every year, and each year that will free up more of school districts' budget for smaller class size, better teacher pay, and other important educational programs.
What's the timeline to get a school district buses once they apply? How long are they waiting?
So the application ends August 19th. We will go through the prioritization process and then let schools know what they've
put in place plans to retain and recruit more teachers. As a result of our efforts, we anticipate opening school with at least 95% of our teacher positions filled. That means for the overwhelming majority of teacher positions planned by our schools for the year ahead, we already have a teacher in place. More than 10,000 teachers have already begun their school year at their schools preparing for their students. Here's some things that contributed to our progress. We raised teacher salaries by 11% this year, putting our teachers among the highest paid in the region. In the spring, we invited and incentivized our current teachers to make a 3-year commitment to teaching in HISD, and 3/4 of the teachers who are coming back this fall have made that commitment to stay with us for 3 years. We have one of the nation's highest starting salaries for teachers with an entry-level salary of $61,500. We offered signing incentives for new teachers up to $5,000 for veteran teachers earlier in the year, and we continue to offer $2,000 signing incentives through the end of August. We've been hosting and will continue to host local job fairs and hiring events, adding to the dozens of trips that our recruiters take across the country every year. We pay critical shortage stipends to teachers in high-need areas like math, science, special education, bilingual education, as well as counselors, social workers, nurses, and transportation staff. We're welcoming almost 100 international candidates with certification from their home countries to teach in critical shortage areas this year. And we have an alternative certification program which we made free to recruit teachers from other professions. So people who make a career switch can earn their certification without any cost while becoming a teacher in HISD. After all of these things, in any year, in any district, schools open with some number of teacher vacancies, and we know on the 22nd that we'll have some vacancies. We're actively working with our principals to prepare to plan coverage for those cases. Most of our schools have additional certified staff, teachers performing other duties outside of the classrooms in their buildings, and our principals in some cases will assign those other certified staff to serve students in classes where there's a vacancy. And we'll also utilize long-term substitutes, prioritizing our long-term substitutes who actually hold certification to work as a dedicated substitute at the beginning of the school year in those cases where we anticipate a potential vacancy. And of course, meanwhile, we'll continue hiring. We're taking a long-term approach to staffing our classes with excellent teachers, and our efforts will not stop when school begins on August 22nd. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Grant Skinner. Of course, he mentioned on the heels of a pandemic, which I think is something that excites everybody in the room. But even though we are on the heels of the pandemic, we're still paying close attention to the health and safety matters of our county, of our city, of our state, and our country. So at this time, I'd like to invite Dr. Candace Casella to the microphone to provide a health and safety update.
Thank you, Superintendent House. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Candace Castillo. I'm the Executive Officer of Student Support Services here in HISD. And we are excited and expecting our families and our students back on Monday, August 22nd. We know that right now there is a lot of different headlines. We continue to be on a pandemic, and that means that we still also are dealing now with the new monkeypox or the rise of monkeypox cases. So I want to start by reassuring our families that the district has taken and continues to take steps to ensure that we are going to be preventing as much as possible any type of spread. We are continuously working with our local health agencies, including the Houston Health Department, to train our nurses, to ensure that we have best practices in place and that we have the appropriate protocols in place as well in the event that this new communicable disease will get higher than what it is right now. We are going to continue using the cleaning protocols that we have been using since the pandemic, which means that we are using hospital-grade products to clean all of our facilities. Our facilities are clean consistently throughout the day, especially those areas that are considered high-touch surfaces, so to ensure that, again, our students and our staff remains clean, remain safe with areas that are clean consistently. As you all know, since the spring of 2022, we have updated our COVID-19 specific protocols. That means that since the spring, we have no longer required masks to be mandatory. That's going to continue. Our students and families and our staff will have the option to wear a mask if that's what they need. We do highly encourage anyone that needs any additional layer of protection to wear a mask when needed and where needed. They have that option, and we look forward for them to make the decision that best suits their case. We also want to stress with our families the importance of talking to our kids about hygiene protocols. Hygiene etiquette is going to become more important, especially again, we're continue battling COVID and then now monkeypox. So we want our families to understand what the best prevention measures are, and so ensuring that our children understand that at this time we're not encouraging or we don't want them to be sharing food or drinks. We want them to, as much as possible, be able to wash or sanitize their hands. Our campuses are going to continue having hand sanitizer stations, so they're going to have access to that, and of course our families are able to provide any additional type of protection they feel their student may need. We also want to encourage our families to understand what the symptoms are, so they are talking to their children, so the children can tell them if they're feeling any kind of way. We don't minimize those, and families can seek the help that they need. And the other piece that we want to also ensure that families are being very proactive with is washing of clothes, beddings, towels, and not sharing any of that among other groups that are outside their households, so that our kids, again, can remain safe. And most importantly, again, we want our families to be monitoring for symptoms. Symptoms can, sometimes be very similar among different diseases, so we just want, again, enforce that they're not minimizing any kinds of symptoms. We encourage families to keep kids home when they are sick or they are presenting symptoms of any communicable disease, so we can ensure that the rest of our community are also staying safe or we're preventing any type of spread. As we know, the best way to protect ourselves of communicable disease, besides prevention measures that we can take, vaccination is one of them. We are continuously working again with the health department and other partners to offer vaccine clinics throughout our communities. We're also going to be offering COVID-19 testing the weekend before school starts, and then the following weekend open to the community as well. So we want to ensure that we're bringing those preventive measures that they can leverage and taking advantage of if that's something that they need. But again, monitoring symptoms, getting vaccinated if they are able to get vaccinated is going to be something that's going to be prevention in the long term, so we encourage to do that. And if they have any questions about testing or vaccination, they can always check the website or contact their schools. Every school is hosting different type of back to school events, and they're having a lot of these preventive measures against communicable disease available. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Costello. So for the last 20 minutes, you guys have received quite a bit of information, but we'd like to open up for just a few questions before we conclude the press conference.
Superintendent, the board item that you mentioned that's going to be up for a vote tomorrow, does that include the 200 rifles and ballistic shields for all HIC officers?
That is correct, absolutely.
And if approved, how soon could those arrive?
I can't give you a particular date, but we would be moving with our procurement department as soon as possible to get those officers outfitted ASAP.
My question is also the same. How many items are you presenting tomorrow to the school board to improve the safety of the students?
There are a few different items. I don't have those that agenda item, but it is public records, and it's on our website to take a look at exactly what those items are.
Can you speak a little bit more about how that equipment would be used in training? Just because I think a lot of parents were taken aback to hear that HISD schools are not prepared for an active shooting.
And I want to be clear about what that looks like, because it was, in my opinion, taken a little bit out of context. I think there's very few school districts that are prepared for an active shooter with an automatic weapon. That's a very different type of perpetrator. So if you look at the difference between Santa Fe, the difference between Uvalde, Santa Fe, there was was not a fully automatic weapon utilized. There was less lives that were lost. Uvalde, unfortunately, there was a fully automatic weapon used. So there are very few school system, ISD police departments that are prepared at that level. But my belief is that our officers, our students, our community, our staff deserves the best preparation as we look forward to the future.
So to be clear, if you have this equipment, would you consider yourselves and this district prepared?
I would definitely see that we would be as prepared as one can be. And I think it's about not only protecting, but being ready for the inevitable, hoping that the inevitable doesn't occur.
I was going to ask a question to Chief Lopez in
Sure,
Spanish.
absolutely.
You could have asked me in Spanish. I might not have been able to answer you, but
Chief López, mencionaba lo que decía el superintendente hace unas semanas, se decía no estaban preparados. El día de mañana van a presentar unas propuestas a la mesa directiva del distrito escolar. ¿Qué es lo que ustedes están pidiendo para estar preparados? Y también mencionaba más temprano de que el distrito escolar independiente de Houston son los que van a estar actuando directamente, lidiando con alguna situación de emergencia.
Como dice claro, cuando una cosa pasa en la escuela, los oficiales de HRC vamos a responder. Y estamos preparados a responder, pero necesitamos el equipo para hacer un atento más mejor, sin un rifle, sin los shields y el equipo que necesitamos para romper las puertas, para abrir las ventanas. Eso es lo que necesitamos. Y necesitamos el equipo y entrenamiento para hacer esas cosas.
¿Qué es lo que me puede explicar qué están pidiendo? ¿Cuál es la petición a la mesa directiva?
Son las cosas que están en la agenda que pueden mirar online. Son rifles, shields balísticos, herramientas para abrir las puertas, cosas así, varias cosas.
Si se aprueba esto, ¿cuándo van a estar utilizándolas? ¿Las van a tener listas para cuando empiece el ciclo escolar?
Va a tener como unos, no sé cuánto tiempo, pero depende en el proceso cuando las personas que vamos a usar los rifles y el equipo, depende cómo está el supply chain. No va a ser como la semana que viene, va a ser un poquito tiempo.
Last week, Mayor Turner had mentioned he was planning on speaking with you, and he said the city was willing to offer resources if needed to HISD. Has that conversation happened? And
So the mayor and I speak quite often, and we have communicated in the last week, but we communicate quite often. And the mayor, and it's not just the city. I want to be clear about that. It's been the consul, the sheriff's department, all of the first responders, the fire. They all have a vested interest in our children. And we've been very pleased with what that communication looks like, and we believe that communication will definitely be followed up with action if and when there is a situation that we need them.
have they offered any kind of specific resources though at this point?
Yes, Chief has worked very closely with HPD and other first responders. A lot of people didn't know it, and we try to keep certain things close to the vest. In terms of what we share, we don't want to share too much information to become vulnerable. But what I will say is that we will continue to work very close with them to ensure that the safety and security of our students and staff is A1.
I wanted to also ask about the COVID sick leave policy. I know there have been concerns that teachers could be coming to work sick now that y'all are doing away with the specific COVID sick leave, and also the idea of teachers staying employed when you have staffing issues and you get rid of that sick leave. Kind of what comes next with that?
I think we're just in a different place. If you look at the COVID leave policies across the state and across the country, most people are moving in this direction. We feel like with vaccines available, with masking still optional, that it puts us in a very different place. So we don't expect to have major issues in reference to this shift, but we're looking forward to making whatever modifications along the way that we need to. But we feel very good about where we are and the decisions that we've made thus far.
And speaking of staffing, so I know that last year there was a real push to make sure that certified teachers were teaching these core subjects. Where are y'all on that process this year?
It's no different. Everyone wants a certified teacher in front of their child or in front of a classroom on the first day of school. as Chief Grant Skinner indicated, 95% of our classrooms will have that certified teacher, and we'll continue to work. The data is changing every day as we continue to process and hire individuals to be a part of HISD. I think the compensation package was a major part of that. Knowing that over 10,000 teachers are ready and will be ready to go on that first day, I think is extremely important. We also have the option, and have put this out to employees in this building that would like to volunteer. Last year we deployed them and put them out there, but this year we're going to do more of a volunteer basis of individuals that work at Hattie Mae that would like to go out and volunteer to get the year started.
Is there any trends in the vacancy, are any grade levels being affected more so than others, or geographic regions? Will some campuses bear a bigger part of the brunt?
We had some priority areas, and I'll let Chief Grant Skinner talk a little bit about those. Of course, we sunsetted Achieve 180, and we're focusing on transformation schools right now. The majority, I think, of our transformation schools are filled. As we look at our principal vacancies as well, the majority of those filled. There may be one principal vacancy going into the start of next week, and I think we'll have that solidified, if not an interim, before that time. But I don't know if there are any major trends by grade level or by race or particular area of town. I think we've done a solid job to really close the gaps that we needed to. Anything else, Chief Grant Skinner, that you want to share?
I have a question for Selena. Candice Castillo, en español.
Sí, claro.
Si me pudiera explicar de qué manera el distrito escolar se está preparando ante este brote de la viruela del mono. ¿Están tomando algunos protocolos o van a tomar algunos protocolos específicos para el inicio?
Sí, nosotros tenemos protocolos ya establecidos para cualquier tipo de enfermedad que se considera una enfermedad infecciosa con propagación rápida, y la viruela del mono no es distinta a lo que tenemos. Entonces nosotros seguimos trabajando con las agencias de salud locales, incluyendo el Departamento de Salud de la ciudad de Houston. Mañana nuestras enfermeras van a estar recibiendo entrenamiento específico de cómo monitorear, qué clases de síntomas, hay que ponerle más cuidado nuevamente, no solamente las familias a los estudiantes, pero también todos nosotros tenemos que hacer nuestra parte en cuanto veamos algún tipo de dolencia, no minimizarla y buscar el cuidado propicio para ello. Entonces, nosotros seguimos constantemente monitoreando los nuevos desarrollos que se den, la información de la agencia, de la CDC, y a partir de allí, si hay que modificar algo, nosotros tomamos esos pasos.
We got time for 2 more questions, y'all.
As far as the safety goes, in speaking with parents, they're happy about the idea that you guys might get more of the equipment if that vote passes tomorrow. But they also had some concerns about just the everyday safety and some of the facilities safety. Has there been any changes to the school's physical structure or police staffing on campuses since last school year?
Yeah, I think before you came in, we talked a little bit about some of the fencing and other upgrades, cameras over the course of the summer. But I think one of the things that we really have to understand is the vigilance around individuals being aware. It is so important to go along with the training